So I did my video project on the Freemen that were fighting for the Union. Now there's a really big rush of former slaves that went to enlist for the U.S. Army around 1861. Now, according to the 1792 law that black people can't bear arms, they were sadly turned away. All these volunteers requested the government change their laws because they were like, we want to fight for the Union. Now, there was a lot of debate in the Lincoln administration because they did think that giving guns to black people would be a bad thing since they were slaves for so long, and they thought they may rebel or do something they probably shouldn't with the guns. But in the middle of 1862, there was a lot more former slaves that were volunteering than white people. So the government then reconsidered the ban and eventually allowed black people to enlist in the army. So just talk about African Americans in the military. Any slaves that were captured during or after battles became free if they were captured by the Union. And because of that, then they were eligible for the Union Army, and most did join. Frederick Douglass pushed for the allowing of blacks in the Army and actually did a really good job on that. And about May of 1863, the Bureau of Colored Troops was established. And then white men were usually officers, giving blacks not a lot of ability to move up in the ranks. It was still kind of segregated, I guess you can say. And the picture down here is Frederick Douglass. So treatment and the military for African Americans. Black soldiers were typically paid less, with white soldiers earning 13 a month and black soldiers earning about $10 a month. Now, on November of 1863, Sergeant William Walker was convincing his fellow soldiers to go on strike. And then army officials found out, and then they threatened to charge the soldiers with mutiny. Because of that, most of them went back to work. But Sergeant William Walker did refuse, and in February he was tried, convicted, and executed by a firing squad for trying to help his fellow African American soldiers. Now, blacks were not paid equally until March of 1865, so about a year and a half later, they weren't paid um, equally, or they weren't paid equally until about a year and a half later. The 1st South Carolina Volunteer Infantry Regiment, so that was the first officially recognized unit for African Americans that was part of the Army. It was authorized by Lincoln, and the unit itself reached about 1,000 men. Now, on January 1st, after they were officially accepted, and then February 1865, they became the 33rd Regiment. They fought in lots of battles, did really well. They were known for their bravery and their how they fought really well, and they freed many slaves. On January 26th of 1863, they encountered Confederates. They had minimal losses, but they lost a surprise element when they came across a cavalry unit. And then, even though they lost um, the element of surprise, they did help claim Florida. And then they fought in the Battle of Honey Hill and captured a fort on James Island. Now you can notice down here, this is actually the 1st South Carolina Volunteer Infantry Regiment, listening to the Emancipation Proclamation. So let's talk about the 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment. It became famous after assault on Fort Wagner. They had enormous casualties before retreating. They fought well, but a lot of them did die during that battle. Because of the courage and all the sacrifice that the 54th made and committed, they instilled a lot of doubt in the Confederate Army. The Confederates didn't think that the blacks would be able to fight well, and they're like, oh, no, who cares about the blacks? But because of that, then they were like, oh, these people can fight. Sergeant William was the first African American to win the Medal of Honor. Right down this corner, this is Sergeant William, and he paved way for the subsequent black regiments. Not he, but the 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment did. Um, they allowed the other regiments to feel like they can actually do more and quote unquote fit in. So some notable black soldiers. Christian Fleetwood is one of them. He was a free black. He was born free. He won the Medal of Honor. He enlisted in the 4th Regiment and then was promoted to sergeant because he was a very well educated um, young man. He fought in the Battle of Chaffin's Farm, I think is how you say it. And then when Sergeant Alfred Hilton was wounded, he was shot and fell. He actually came in and protected the flag by grabbing it and was already holding another one. He grabbed it before it could touch the ground, showing that he was very patriotic. He didn't want the flag to touch the ground. The Confederates then retreated due to the overwhelming forces in that battle. Another notable black soldier is Alexander Kelly. He won the Medal of Honor for bravery at Battle of Chaffin's Farm, so he fought with Christian Fleetwood. He also protected a flag and carried it with him and fought under heavy fire. So this is Christian Fleetwood and this is Alexander Kelly. Anne Bradford Stokes, she was born a slave, but then was later taken by the Union as contraband from a battle. She volunteered on her own to be a nurse. Many African American women were actually recruited and paid to be nurses. So she went and was a nurse in the Navy. So she actually fought for a pension because when she left the Navy, they didn't let her have a pension. Um, she found it hard because she was illiterate and didn't know how to read and write. So a lot of that legal stuff was a problem for her. So she did go out and learn to read and write and finally got the pension when the Navy said that she served as a boy and then left due to literal disability. So then they gave her $12 a month for her pension. Susie King Taylor is another notable person. She was born a slave, but then attended two secret schools that they had in that slave area. 14, she became free when her uncle took her to federal ships in the waters near a Confederate base. She became part of the 1st South Carolina Volunteers Regiment, and she did a lot of cooking, the washing, and she tended to the sick and wounded. And then she also taught former enslaved people how to read and write since she learned at a young age and was very literate. She was the only African woman to publish a memoir about her experience. And that's Susie King Taylor. I couldn't find a picture of um, the other lady. I couldn't, it didn't want to pop up anything for her. So, talk about death of African Americans. They died from a lot of disease, a lot of pneumonia, typhus, dysentery, all sorts of nasty diseases. So it would get spread through other for because of other people being infected, the unburied animals and humans that were just lying around in some very unsanitary conditions. People lack clean clothes, adequate shelter, the proper medical food care and food. Many runaway slaves died once they reached refuge because of these harsh conditions. The Confederates thought that black men fighting um, was because that white men were guilty, and because of that, they're like, we're going to kill and or enslave any of these black soldiers that we capture. So there's a myth that has gone around the internet. The main claims that there were blacks that fought for the Confederate Army. So slaves were impressed into service, but they weren't considered a soldier because they weren't necessarily given a gun or really they didn't really fight for the Confederates. Um, they had some slaves that volunteered, but they were turned away. Tennessee did allow for blacks to recruit, but they never followed through with that and never recruited any blacks. So, in short, overall, black men didn't fight for Confederates, and it is a myth. So, thank you. That was my presentation on the freedmen fighting for the Union.